Hey everybody, it's Kelly. Welcome back to another episode of Ask a Therapist. Today we're talking about religious OCD. We've talked around it, we've talked a little bit about it, but today, this whole video, religious OCD. There's a lot of information out there about it, and some of it is super on point, some of it not so much. I'm hoping today is going to clear some of that up for you and maybe even point some of you in the direction of recovery. First things first, as always, let's get some definitions out of the way. Religious OCD is actually very similar to OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. It is specifically geared towards religious thinking and religious habits. It is a specific type of OCD that's characterized by intrusive thoughts, images, and urges related to religious or spiritual beliefs. Those intrusive thoughts, images, and urges cause significant distress and anxiety in a person, which then causes them to engage in compulsive behaviors in order to alleviate that distress, or at the very least, neutralize that specific discomfort. So there we go. That's just straight up textbook definition. There are different ways that this plays out in people's lives because of that definition. We're talking about significant distress, and significant means different things to different people. What is significant to me might not be significant to you, which is why it is important, if you think that this is something that's happening in your life, for you to go see a mental health professional in order to get diagnosis and treatment for something like this. You can have religious trauma without having religious OCD. There are factors that make you more susceptible to having religious OCD, but also they don't always necessarily mean that you will have it. Some of those factors that sometimes make it more possible for someone to have religious OCD are things like biological factors. So if you have a family history of OCD or other mental health disorders that may make you more susceptible to this, stressful life events, traumatic events, or significant life changes can trigger OCD symptoms or make them more prominent in your life. Also, perfectionism and rigid thinking. People who have OCD do tend to have more rigid thinking and be more driven towards perfectionism. Having these things and also having religious trauma does not automatically mean you have religious OCD. Again, these are things that may be factors that make you more susceptible to it. If you have these factors and you also have religious trauma, these are things you want to pay attention to. And if you have suspicion this is happening, you will want to go see a mental health professional that can help you through this. How might this show up in your life? These are just a few ways that this might show up for you. I am going to be looking at this through the lens of those in the LGBTQIA+ community specifically, but also these are themes that could be present in anyone's life. So number one, doubt and uncertainty about faith. For people who are in faith practices, doubting the existence of God, the validity of religious teachings, their own salvation, and that starts sort of a very intense anxiety with the idea of abandoning your religion and abandoning God or becoming an atheist, worries about the stability of a belief system when you're not believing the things that you've been taught to believe in. And a lot of times that'll sort of lead someone in the direction of ritualistically repeating the things that brought them close to their faith in the beginning. So for people who believe in rituals that help them as Christians to be born again, maybe repeated altar calls and that sort of thing, like really digging into, in a excessive way, those things that made them feel close to their belief system in the first place. For a lot of queer people who deconstruct and leave religion, that starts to happen as they start to see that mismatch between who they are and who the church expects them to be, and that they essentially have to choose whether or not they can be who they are or be who the church and maybe their family, maybe most of their friends expect them to be. That fear of what happens if I do live into who I know myself to be. Do I lose my salvation? Do I get to go to heaven? Does God become disappointed in me? What do I do with that? And pushing that part of them down, throwing themselves into religious rituals, that sort of thing. That's sort of how that shows up typically in that process. Now, that can happen without it being religious OCD, and that can be religious OCD when it happens. Again, it very much depends on the person. When things become an interruption to the process of the rest of your life, that is what we call clinically significant distress, and that is where it is something that you do need to pay attention to as to whether or not it is harmful or hurtful to you and the other areas of your life, right? If it is taking up time and brain space away from other areas of your life, that is perhaps not super healthy and something you want to talk to someone about. Fear of sin and damnation. This is a huge one within the queer community because the actions of being part of the queer community are things that can really scare people. And this piece is something I'm going to do another video on next week. So stay tuned for that. What does it actually mean to have sex with someone who is the same sex as you? What do you do? How does that work? How do you get past those fears when you're coming out of a place where you didn't actually think that would ever be your life? We're going to talk about that a little bit next week, so stay tuned for that. But the fear of damnation and the fear of being sinful. When you're coming out of purity culture and the idea that anything sexual prior to marriage is a sin, and you're also expecting that you can't ever marry the person that you're attracted to or the person that you want to be married to, that fear of doing something wrong and being caught or being found out and essentially going to hell, it's intense, and it is something that really does keep people inside of that bubble for a long time and doesn't necessarily go away once you leave. Now, where it tips over into religious OCD is when it leads to excessive checking of behaviors, like checking in of things that may possibly be sins and may possibly be things you have to repent for, or just completely staying away from anything that may potentially be a sin in any way, or a sin might be committed around you in any way, in order to stay completely blameless and sinless. That is where it may tip over a bit. Scrupulosity. This is where people engage in rituals within their religion to an excessive extent. And in general, it's meant to purify yourself. So again, those who do find themselves to be part of the queer community while still in their religion often will attempt to use religious rituals to make that not the case anymore. So the video that I did about gaslighting and the ways that Christians convince themselves that they're not part of the queer community, some of those things to a larger extent do kind of fit into this category. The different rituals like baptism and prayer and fasting and those types of things that you do regularly and excessively in order to cleanse you of something that you see as a sin or you see as taking you away from God. Like engaging in those to, again, an excessive amount in order to make up for, in this case, something that is really just who you are, which does then cause things we talked about like moral injury and that sort of thing. It really does impact you on a very intense level, but that is typically one of the ways that religious entities will tell you to focus on in order to run from these sins. And that can provide a bit of comfort while you're in the situation, which is why so many people are so given to performing those rituals and walking in that direction. And also, if you have any of those other sort of danger signs and also are given to OCD in the first place, it does sort of leave you ripe for the possibility of religious OCD in general. See how that works? Again, if you find yourself trying to pray the gay away or being baptized in order to not have impure thoughts over and over again, that doesn't mean you have religious OCD. And also, if you tend to think this might be describing you, this might be something worth talking to a mental health professional about. This last one is the last one for a reason. It's magical thinking. This is the one that seems to be so present for so many people and they don't necessarily realize it's still there. Because while you're in a religion, again, specifically Christianity, but really a lot of different religions, your thought life has a really intense consequence attached to it. The things that you think are thought into existence, right? Or you'll throw up a just in case kind of prayer if there's something that you really want to have happen, right? So if you believe that on a really intense level, you are also going to feel there's a lot of blame and a lot of focus on your thought life, right? So in that vein, if you've taken it to the extreme of religious OCD, you are going to be very focused on your thought life and the impacts of your thought life. So if you have a negative thought about someone and something bad happens to them, you are going to feel a lot of very intense guilt and responsibility there. which also means in the religious OCD realm, you are going to potentially engage in rituals and ritualistic behavior and repetitive behaviors in order to make sure that your thoughts are not negative and are not responsible for bad things that happen to people and are not inciting negative consequences for yourself or for others, because your thought life is often unbidden in some instances, right? But you feel the responsibility for it because all along you've been taught that you are responsible for your thoughts, and your thoughts are usually evil and usually sinful and da 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 da. And when you believe that for a very long time, and you believe that they have some responsibility in the way that things turn out for people, and also you are given to religious OCD in general, you can see how that would become a very distracting, very distressful thing for people. Even not in the religious OCD umbrella, this is one of the last things that people tend to get rid of sort of in their habits when it comes to leaving the church as a whole. That thought of, oh, can I say this? Is speaking this into existence going to be something that makes it happen? That's something that sort of fits into society as a whole, but comes from a religious background. Speaking something into existence is something that people say whether they're religious or not. The idea of your words having some spiritual and magical power, or your thoughts having some spiritual and magical power, is not necessarily grounded in a whole lot of reality or fact. And yet it is something that so many of us find ourselves caught up in, usually due to things we are taught in our childhood or in our religions. Okay, so what do? If you find yourself watching this video and you feel like,
oh, that might be me.
Again, seeking out some mental health supports would be the way to go. Seeking out a therapist that works with religious OCD is a good idea. When you're looking for a therapist, if you go to psychologytoday.com, check out the link in the description. No sponsorship or anything, just so you know, that's a good way to sort of start to search for a therapist. But when you first email them or talk to them, ask them if they've ever worked with religious OCD before. You're allowed to ask your therapist questions. You're allowed to ask them if they have any experience or if they're comfortable working with what you want to work on. You know, they can't give you specifics like, I've worked with this person on this. They can't tell you that kind of stuff because that would be a violation, but they can tell you their comfort level. And honestly, if they don't want to tell you their comfort level, do you want to work with them? That's your call, but think about that a little bit. You then get to decide who you want to work with and who you want to have help you through the things that you're working on. Working through religious trauma, whether it's religious OCD, religious trauma, religious recovery, working through the things that are left over in our lives after we have left religion is not easy. And also, it is always worth the work once you've done it. It's usually worth the work during it too, but it's not super easy. One of the things that I love most about the community that has been built here on the channel is that you support each other so well in those endeavors. I want to take a minute to thank you for that. Some of these comments on these videos and the way that you share your stories together and support each other's stories it's just amazing to be part of. So thank you so much for that, and keep it up, because even people who don't comment read that and gain strength through that. So thank you for that. And that's it for today. Thank you so much for being here. I will see you all next time. And until then, take care of yourselves and each other.